A persistent, almost rhythmic scratching began just before dawn, a sound both delicate and unnerving in the profound stillness of the African bush. It wasn't the frantic scrabbling of a rodent, nor the resonant thud of a larger animal. This was softer, yet incredibly precise, like tiny claws tracing lines on weathered wood, always at the exact spot where her flimsy door met the frame. Sarah, an American wildlife photographer and conservationist, first dismissed it as a trick of the wind or the nocturnal stirrings of some harmless creature. She was accustomed to the symphony of the wild, the chirps and rustles and distant roars that formed the backdrop of her secluded life. But this sound was different. It held an insistent, almost demanding quality that pulled her from the depths of sleep each morning, just as the first sliver of gray light touched the horizon. She lived in a modest, yet robust, research outpost, a solitary structure tucked away in a remote corner of the continent, far from any paved road or human settlement. Her days were spent tracking elusive species, documenting their behaviors, and tirelessly advocating for their protection. The isolation, while challenging, was also her sanctuary. Years ago, a personal tragedy had driven her to seek solace and purpose amidst the raw, unfiltered beauty of nature, leaving behind a life she no longer recognized. Here, surrounded by the ancient rhythms of the land, she had found a fragile peace, rebuilding herself one sunrise at a time. Her resilience was forged in solitude, her independence honed by necessity. The scratching continued day after day, a tiny auditory clock marking the beginning of each new cycle. It started precisely at the moment the stars began to fade, and the sky hinted at the impending light, lasting for several long minutes before abruptly ceasing. Sarah initially surmised it might be a genet, or perhaps a curious mongoose, creatures known for their nocturnal investigations. She knew better than to interfere, understanding the delicate balance of the ecosystem she inhabited. But the sheer regularity of it, the almost ritualistic approach, began to gnaw at her. It wasn't the random exploration of a hungry animal. It felt too directed, too focused on her door. It became an unsettling prelude to her day, a tiny mystery that steadily grew in her mind. Each morning she would lie in her cot, listening to the small, grating sounds, her imagination conjuring various scenarios. Was it injured? Was it seeking something? Or was it merely a creature of habit, unaware of the human on the other side of the thin barrier? The thought that it might be something larger, something more predatory, occasionally flickered through her mind, sending a shiver through her. She had built her outpost to withstand the elements and most common wildlife, but a truly determined predator could make short work of even reinforced doors. Yet, the sound itself was too soft for anything truly formidable. It was this contradiction, the persistence combined with the lack of brute force, that kept her from immediate alarm, but fostered a growing curiosity. The unease wasn't born of fear, but of an unanswered question. A silent plea, perhaps, echoing in the pre-dawn stillness. It became a personal challenge, a puzzle that presented itself daily, demanding to be solved. Before we delve deeper into Sarah's extraordinary encounter, remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible animal stories. The scratching at her door, a sound that had once been a mere annoyance, evolved. It sharpened, becoming more insistent, almost desperate, and now it was accompanied by soft, mournful whimpers that chilled Sarah to her core. Her initial dismissal had long since evaporated, replaced by a growing unease that curdled into genuine worry. What creature, small enough to scratch so near the ground yet persistent enough to return night after night, could sound so utterly bereft. She had tried everything, banging on the door, shouting, even kicking the sturdy wood with a force that made her own bones ache, hoping to scare away whatever it was. Each attempt was met with a brief silence, only for the heart-wrenching sounds to resume a few moments later, perhaps even louder, more insistent. Her tactics, born of a desire for peace and privacy, had utterly failed. The nocturnal disturbances began earlier each day, encroaching upon the precious hours just before dawn. Her sleep, already a fragile commodity in the remote African wilderness, was fragmented, broken by the recurring, haunting melody of distress. The lack of restful sleep started to fray her nerves, impacting her concentration during the day as she meticulously documented the migratory patterns of local bird species. Her work, usually a source of immense satisfaction and focus, became a struggle to maintain amidst the persistent, unseen plea for help. A profound sense of responsibility began to settle upon her, heavy and undeniable, despite the fact she still had no idea what animal was behind the persistent lamentations. It was a bizarre, almost illogical feeling, yet it took root deep within her, defying her scientific training to remain detached from the wild. Each morning, after the sounds finally ceased with the first blush of sunrise, Sarah would meticulously check the perimeter of her small, sturdy cabin. She scanned the dusty ground for tracks, for any definitive sign. Each time, her search yielded nothing concrete, only indistinct indentations that were too small to belong to any large predator known to roam the area, yet significantly larger than the prints left by the rodents and smaller mammals that occasionally scurried past. The mystery deepened with each fruitless investigation. It was as if the creature simply vanished with the light, leaving only the memory of its desperate cries and the faint, ambiguous imprints as evidence of its nightly vigil. The lack of clear information only amplified her concern, feeding the nascent sense of responsibility she felt. A strange, almost primal connection began to stir within her. It was an involuntary response, a deep-seated empathy that resonated with the raw vulnerability expressed in those soft, mournful cries. She, who had dedicated her life to observing nature from a respectful distance, felt an unfamiliar, almost maternal instinct blossoming within her chest. The creature's desperate pleas had chipped away at her professional detachment, bypassing her intellect and going straight for the heart. Every whimpering sound, every persistent scratch, was no longer just a noise. It was a testament to suffering, a desperate cry for aid in a world where only the strong survived. Sarah, who had sought solitude and purpose in this wild expanse, now found herself unexpectedly drawn into an unfolding drama, one that tugged at her carefully constructed emotional barriers, forcing her to confront a vulnerability that mirrored her own. Her peace was unequivocally shattered, replaced by a yearning to understand and, more unsettlingly, to help. One morning, the familiar soft cries turned into an urgent whimper, too heartbreaking to ignore. A strange, almost primal instinct took hold of Sarah, pushing aside her usual caution. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the sturdy wooden door, her mind racing through every possible scenario. What if it was a hyena, or something far more dangerous, injured and desperate? The sun was still a promise, not a reality, clinging to the horizon with hesitant fingers of light. Taking a deep breath, Sarah slowly, meticulously, cracked open the door, just enough to create a sliver of darkness through which she could peer. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, scanning the area directly outside her threshold. There, huddled against the rough wood of her porch, was a sight that stole her breath and squeezed her heart. It wasn't a large, fearsome predator, nor a common nocturnal scavenger. Instead, A tiny, impossibly small creature stared back at her with wide, terrified amber eyes. It was a leopard cub, barely bigger than a domestic cat, its fur matted with grime and dust, its ribs starkly visible beneath its thin coat. Its head seemed too large for its emaciated body, and its limbs trembled visibly, barely supporting its weight. The revelation hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. A leopard cub, here, alone. Every fiber of her professional training screamed at her to retreat, to avoid intervention, to let nature take its course. She knew the golden rule of wildlife conservation: do not interfere. Habituating a wild animal, especially a predator, was fraught with danger, both for the animal and for humans. It could lead to dependency, to the animal losing its natural fear of people, ultimately jeopardizing its chances of survival in the wild. But then she looked again into those desperate, pleading eyes, saw the raw vulnerability, the undeniable struggle for life etched into every trembling muscle. This cub wasn't just struggling. It looked too weak to survive another sunrise on its own. The dilemma was agonizing, a brutal tug-of-war between her intellect and her deepest human empathy. Her mind, trained in scientific rigor, presented all the logical reasons to close the door, to let the wild claim its own. But her heart, scarred by her own losses and softened by the relentless, mournful cries of the past weeks, refused to comply. The cub was a mirror, reflecting a fragility she knew all too well. Its vulnerability awakened a deep, almost forgotten echo within her, a connection to her own past struggles, her own desperate need for solace and safety after her personal tragedy. This tiny creature's struggle for survival, its raw, innocent plea, bypassed all her rational defenses and spoke directly to the profound need for connection that still resided within her. The cub didn't flee, didn't snarl, didn't even flinch. It simply held her gaze, a silent, almost articulate plea in its wide, wet eyes. Its head was slightly tipped, as if trying to understand the sudden appearance of this giant human. Without conscious thought, Sarah found herself reaching into the small cold pack she kept by her door for emergencies. She pulled out a small, dried piece of jerky, a meager breakfast she'd planned for herself. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her hand, palm open, offering the meat. The cub watched her hand with unwavering intensity, its nostrils flaring as it caught the scent. After a tense moment, it took a tentative step forward, then another, its small paws barely making a sound on the dirt. It carefully sniffed the offering, then, with a surprising surge of energy, snatched the jerky and devoured it in a few frantic bites, its little body trembling with the effort. A tiny, almost imperceptible purr rumbled in its chest, a sound so fragile it was almost lost in the stillness of the dawn. Sarah, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of something akin to hope, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the rising sun. Over the next few days, a quiet ritual began to unfold. Sarah continued to leave small portions of food and a bowl of fresh water just outside her door each dawn. She would place them there silently, then retreat, observing from a crack in her window. The cub, no longer scratching frantically, now waited patiently, a small shadow at the edge of the morning light. It would emerge from the low scrub, its movements still stiff but visibly less wobbly, approach the offerings with cautious eagerness, and consume them with a hunger that spoke volumes of its previous deprivation. Each day, its ribs seemed a little less prominent, its fur a little less matted. Its eyes, though still wary, held a glint of growing recognition when it glimpsed Sarah's retreating form. This tentative trust, built on sustenance and consistency, was a fragile bridge forming between two disparate worlds. Sarah spent hours observing the cub from a respectful distance, using her binoculars to study its every move. She noted its increasingly confident gait, the way it explored the immediate vicinity of her outpost, always returning to the safety of the dense bushes nearby. Her observations confirmed her initial suspicion. There was no sign of a mother. No protective growl, no territorial markings, no other tracks accompanying the cub's small prints. It was truly an orphan, abandoned or separated, far too young to fend for itself in such a harsh environment. The slow progress in its movement, from an unsteady shuffle to a more deliberate walk, underscored its vulnerability and its increasing dependence on the small reserves of food she provided. It looked towards her door, not with the frantic desperation of the first days, but with a quiet expectation, a silent acceptance of her role as its unseen provider. As the days turned into a week, Sarah grappled with the profound ethical implications of her actions. Every instinct as a conservationist screamed against habituating a wild animal. She knew the dangers intimately. Dependent animals often lost their innate hunting skills, became vulnerable to predators, or worse, became a nuisance or threat to human settlements, leading to tragic outcomes. Her rational mind presented countless arguments for ceasing her intervention, for letting nature run its often cruel course. Yet, abandoning this particular cub, now that she had witnessed its struggle and facilitated its small resurgence of strength, felt utterly impossible. The image of its emaciated frame and pleading eyes was seared into her memory. She justified her actions as a temporary measure, a short-term intervention to save a life, promising herself that she would eventually find a way to reintroduce it to the wild once it was strong enough. It was a promise she made to herself, a delicate balance between her professional integrity and her burgeoning compassion. During these quiet observations, she found herself whispering a name for the cub. Due to its unfailing appearance with the first blush of light, she began to call it Dawn. It was a simple name, imbued with the hope of new beginnings and the silent promise of a fresh start. Naming the cub felt significant, a subtle shift in their unspoken relationship. It solidified the growing, albeit unconventional bond between them. Dawn, the tiny leopard cub, had scratched not just at her door, but at the hardened shell around Sarah's heart, slowly but surely finding its way inside. Each sunrise, as Dawn appeared and accepted the food, a silent understanding passed between them, a fragile connection that transcended species, born of desperation and unexpected kindness. The cub's trust, once earned through mere survival, was now deepening, slowly transforming into a deeper, more profound acknowledgement of Sarah's presence and care. This nascent bond was both a comfort and a looming challenge, a responsibility Sarah knew she would soon have to face head-on. The days of simply leaving food out were drawing to a close. For weeks, the ritual continued. Dawn, as Sarah had affectionately named the cub, would appear at her door each morning, no longer scratching, but simply waiting. Sarah would leave food and water, observing from a distance as the little leopard slowly but surely regained strength. She watched its lean frame fill out, its fur regain its luster, its movements becoming more confident, less shaky. She saw the cub's playful instincts emerge, swatting at leaves, stalking imaginary prey in the tall grass before settling back down to wait for its morning meal. Sarah had spent countless hours observing wildlife, but this personal, intimate relationship with a creature she was actively nurturing felt profoundly different. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that Dawn's mother was not coming back. The cub was an orphan, truly alone in a landscape brimming with dangers. The initial internal conflict, the ethical quandary of interfering, had slowly eroded, replaced by an undeniable sense of responsibility. Sarah understood the dangers of habituating a wild animal. Every conservationist understood it. It was a rule etched into their very ethos. But how could she abandon this small, living being that had sought her out, that relied solely on her for survival? To turn her back now felt less like upholding a principle and more like a cruel betrayal. She justified her actions as a temporary measure for survival, a stopgap until Dawn was strong enough to fend for herself. But as the days turned into weeks and Dawn's dependence grew, Sarah knew that temporary was no longer a viable descriptor. Dawn needed more than just a meal left at the door. She needed a caregiver, a protector, perhaps even a teacher. The decision was radical, defying every professional guideline, every cautionary tale she'd ever heard. Yet, it felt profoundly right. One morning, as Dawn sat patiently by her door, the first rays of the sun just kissing the horizon, Sarah didn't just place the food down. She slowly, deliberately, swung the heavy wooden door wide open. The creak resonated in the morning stillness, a sound that felt momentous, a threshold being crossed. Dawn, momentarily startled, froze. Her ears swiveled, her eyes, now vibrant and alert, fixed on the dark opening. A flicker of primal fear crossed her small face, a natural wariness of the unknown, of entering the human domain. But then, as if drawn by an invisible thread of trust, she took a tentative step forward, then another. Her little paws crossed the threshold, one after the other, into the cool shadow of Sarah's hut. It was a silent, profound act of acceptance, a testament to the bond that had blossomed in those quiet, pre-dawn hours. Dawn explored her new, safe space with cautious curiosity. Her nose twitched, taking in the unfamiliar scents. Her tail swished low, a sign of her initial apprehension. Sarah watched, her heart thumping with a mix of trepidation and fierce protectiveness. The challenges were immediate and daunting. How do you feed a growing predator without fostering an unnatural dependence on humans for sustenance? How do you manage wild instincts within the confines of a small, man-made dwelling? Sarah drew upon her extensive knowledge of animal behavior, converting her living space into a miniature rehabilitation center. She meticulously sourced protein, supplementing Dawn's diet, while introducing textures and shapes she would encounter in the wild. She created stimulating environments, using ropes and branches to encourage climbing and pouncing. Through patient care, through gentle, consistent interaction, the bond deepened further. Sarah spent hours simply sitting with Dawn, speaking in soft murmurs, allowing the cub to explore her, to rub against her legs, to sometimes even fall asleep curled at her feet. Dawn, initially skittish, lost her fear entirely, seeing Sarah not as a threat, but as a surrogate mother, a source of comfort and security. The cub's purrs, once fragile and rare, now rumbled with robust contentment, filling the small hut with a symphony of trust. Sarah's existence, once solitary and marked by a quiet ache, was now vibrant, demanding, and filled with a fragile, fierce love for the small, wild creature she had brought in from the dawn. As days bled into weeks, Dawn's transformation was astonishing. The emaciated, trembling cub had given way to a sleek, muscular young leopard, her coat now a rich, dappled gold, her eyes bright with intelligent curiosity. The small outpost, once a sanctuary of solitude for Sarah, now vibrated with Dawn's playful energy. Every morning, the silence was broken, not by scratching, but by the soft thud of Dawn's paws as she bounded around, her innate wildness slowly reasserting itself. Sarah, immersed in what had become her most challenging yet most fulfilling project, dedicated herself to Dawn's rehabilitation. She understood that mere survival wasn't enough. Dawn needed to be a leopard, capable and self-sufficient. Her methods were unconventional, born of necessity and deep understanding. Stuffed toys, initially used for comfort, became prey during elaborate games of stalk and pounce. Sarah would hide them, mimicking the unpredictable movements of small animals, encouraging Dawn's predatory instincts. Controlled exercises, like chasing a lure on a string, honed Dawn's speed and agility. She built makeshift climbing structures, reinforcing the natural proprioception of a leopard in the dense jungle. These weren't mere games. They were carefully designed lessons, preparing Dawn for a life she had been robbed of. The outpost became a dynamic training ground, every corner utilized to foster the skills Dawn would desperately need. Sarah spent hours observing, adjusting, celebrating every small victory, like Dawn's first successful kill of a particularly well-hidden plush mongoose. However, Dawn's growing presence, her increasing size and strength, attracted unwelcome attention. The scent of a young, healthy leopard, even a captive one, was a beacon in the wild. Sarah found fresh tracks of rival predators: a lone hyena, the heavy paw print of an older, established leopard, too close to her perimeter for comfort. Poachers, ever-present specters in this part of Africa, were an even greater concern. The ivory trade had declined, but live animal trafficking, especially of charismatic megafauna like leopards, was a lucrative, brutal business. Sarah heightened her security measures. She reinforced the perimeter fence, installed motion-activated cameras, and carried her dart gun with her on every excursion, a sober reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond the relative safety of her haven. The emotional stakes were escalating. She wasn't just protecting herself, but this precious life she had saved. Amidst the constant vigilance and demanding training, Sarah found profound internal healing. Dawn, in her vibrant, untamed spirit, had become an unexpected balm for Sarah's own deeply wounded soul. The responsibility of nurturing and protecting this innocent life had slowly, imperceptibly, mended parts of her that she believed were irrevocably broken. The act of caring for Dawn, of witnessing her growth and resilience, had given Sarah a renewed sense of purpose, a joy she hadn't felt since before her personal tragedy. She found herself laughing more easily, her stress lines softening, her eyes regaining a spark that had been absent for years. Dawn didn't judge, didn't demand explanations. She simply existed, a magnificent living testament to the possibility of recovery and new beginnings. Their bond transcended species, a silent, powerful communion forged in shared vulnerability and mutual trust. Yet, with Dawn's burgeoning strength and independence came the inevitable, painful realization: Dawn could not stay with her forever. The time for release, though agonizing to contemplate, was approaching rapidly. Sarah knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that keeping Dawn would be a disservice, a betrayal of the very wildness she had fought so hard to preserve. Her mission had always been rehabilitation, not domestication. The ethical lines she had temporarily blurred for survival now needed to be starkly redrawn. With a heavy heart, Sarah began scouting suitable territories. She spent her precious free moments poring over topographical maps, analyzing satellite imagery, and making clandestine journeys deep into the reserve, searching for a place that offered abundant prey, adequate water sources, and minimal existing leopard populations. It had to be a place where Dawn could truly thrive, free from human interference and free from the inherent dangers of habituation. The thought of their separation was a constant ache, a bitter counterpoint to the joy Dawn brought her. But Sarah knew it was the only path forward for her cherished leopard. The decision, once abstract and distant, now loomed, a heavy shadow over their shared existence. Sarah initiated the preparations for Dawn's release, a process steeped in an almost unbearable emotional complexity. Every touch, every shared meal, every playful pounce from Dawn felt imbued with a bittersweet finality. She spent hours meticulously planning, researching, and arranging the logistics, choosing a carefully selected, protected area deep within the reserve. It was a vast expanse of dense bushland, dotted with rocky outcrops and fed by a meandering river, seemingly perfect for a leopard to establish a territory. The location was remote, far from human settlements and poacher routes, offering the best chance for Dawn's untrammeled future. But even as she confirmed the coordinates and secured the necessary permits, a profound sorrow settled deep within her, a quiet ache that resonated with every heartbeat. The day of the release arrived, cloaked in the deceptive calm of an early morning. Sarah had loaded Dawn, now a robust and magnificent young leopard, into a specially designed, spacious carrier. Dawn, sensing the unusual shift in routine, had been restless, her golden eyes questioning Sarah with an intensity that pierced through her resolve. The journey to the release site was silent, punctuated only by the rumbling of the vehicle and the occasional soft growl from Dawn within her enclosure. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the road, knowing that if she looked at Dawn, her carefully constructed composure might shatter. The chosen spot was a clearing near a cluster of tall acacia trees, overlooking a valley that promised plentiful prey. As the sun began to paint the sky in fiery hues, Sarah carefully positioned the carrier, her hands trembling slightly as she unlatched the heavy door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Dawn remained inside, a powerful, watchful silhouette framed by the opening. Her eyes, those intelligent, expressive windows to her soul, fixed on Sarah. It was a look filled with curiosity, perhaps a flicker of apprehension, and an undeniable depth of connection. Sarah's throat tightened, a lump preventing any words from escaping. She knelt, her hand extended, a silent invitation, a final gesture of farewell. Then, with a hesitant, almost reluctant grace, Dawn stepped out. She paused, sniffing the air, her ears swiveling to capture the myriad sounds of the wild. She took a few tentative steps, her muscles rippling beneath her spotted coat, then stopped, glancing back at Sarah one last time. In that prolonged gaze, a world of shared history, of unspoken promises, passed between them. And then, with a surprising surge of speed, Dawn melted into the dense undergrowth, disappearing as if she had been a figment of Sarah's imagination, leaving only an echoing silence and an empty carrier behind. The initial days following the release were agonizing for Sarah. She remained in a makeshift observation post a safe distance away, monitoring Dawn's movements with specialized tracking equipment. The young leopard, accustomed to Sarah's consistent presence and provision, struggled with the harsh realities of true independence. Dawn was a capable hunter, thanks to Sarah's training, but the wild was unforgiving. She missed several kills, her inexperience evident in her approach. She encountered older, more territorial leopards, wisely retreating from confrontations she couldn't win. There were moments of stark despair for Sarah, witnessing Dawn's vulnerability, her struggles. Sarah's heart ached, torn between her desire to intervene and her unwavering commitment to Dawn's wild future. She only stepped in once, discreetly darting a snarling hyena that had cornered a starving Dawn, ensuring her intervention was minimal and unseen by the cub. Then, a pivotal moment arrived. After several tense, sleepless nights for Sarah, Dawn's tracking signal indicated a prolonged period of stillness. Sarah approached with extreme caution, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. What she found brought tears to her eyes. Dawn stood over the carcass of a freshly killed impala, her stance confident, her eyes bright with the fierce satisfaction of a successful hunt. It was her first independent kill, a major milestone. In that powerful image, Sarah saw not just a predator, but a survivor, a testament to her own unwavering efforts. Dawn had faced the wilderness, had stumbled, but ultimately, she had conquered. This was the turning point, the undeniable proof that Dawn possessed the innate strength and learned skills to thrive. Sarah knew with a certainty that finally brought a measure of peace, that her cherished leopard was finally, truly, home. The decision to release Dawn, though intellectually cemented, tore at Sarah's heart. She diligently continued her scouting missions, eventually settling on a vast, untouched section of the reserve, far removed from human habitation and blessed with dense cover and a thriving prey base. This was where Dawn would begin her true life. The actual release was meticulously planned, an operation of both scientific precision and profound emotional weight. Sarah reinforced Dawn's tracking collar, a tiny device that would allow her to monitor the leopard's movements remotely, a digital umbilical cord connecting them even when physically apart. The morning of the release, the air was thick with unspoken farewells. Dawn, now a sleek, muscular young leopard, seemed to sense the shift, her usual playful nips turning into softer nudges against Sarah's hand. Sarah loaded the transport crate onto her vehicle, each clang of metal echoing the finality of the moment. Reaching the designated release site, a secluded glade nestled by a gurgling stream, Sarah positioned the crate. She spoke softly to Dawn, her voice thick with unshed tears, explaining in hushed tones what was happening. When she finally unlatched the heavy door, Dawn hesitated. Her golden eyes, once filled with the fear of an abandoned cub, now held a glimmer of apprehension, mingled with an undeniable wild curiosity. She looked back at Sarah, a long, searching gaze that seemed to ask, "Are you sure?" Sarah gave a firm, reassuring nod, her own heart clenching. With a final, hesitant step, Dawn emerged from the crate, her powerful muscles rippling under her spotted coat. She paused, scenting the unfamiliar air, her ears swiveling, taking in the cacophony of the wild. Then, without another backward glance, she melted into the dense undergrowth, a shadow disappearing into shadows. Sarah stood there for a long time, the silence of the forest deafening, a physical ache in her chest. The days that followed were a torment of anxiety and guarded hope. Sarah retreated to her outpost, glued to the telemetry readings from Dawn's collar. The initial signals were erratic, indicating uncertainty, perhaps fear. Dawn was struggling, navigating a world without Sarah's protective presence, without the easy meals. There were days when the collar remained stationary for too long, sending pangs of dread through Sarah. She resisted the powerful urge to rush out, to intervene, knowing that true independence meant allowing Dawn to face these trials alone. Her occasional clandestine observations, conducted from a safe and respectful distance, confirmed the struggle. Dawn was thin, her movements less confident, but she was learning. The turning point came weeks later. The telemetry showed sustained movement, a confident pattern of hunting and exploring. One morning, Sarah received a signal that was unequivocally clear. Dawn had made a kill. Not a small rodent or a bird, but a medium-sized antelope, proof of her burgeoning skill. Sarah raced to the location, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and relief. From a hidden vantage point, she watched as Dawn, sleek and powerful, guarded her prize. The young leopard moved with an innate grace, a predatory efficiency that spoke of generations of wild instinct finally unleashed. It was a moment of profound triumph, a tangible sign that her efforts had not been in vain. Dawn was no longer Sarah's cub. She was a leopard, wild and free. As months turned into a year, Dawn's signals became those of a thriving, independent female. Her territory expanded, her presence respected by other predators. On one of her rare, distant reconnaissance trips, Sarah witnessed it. Dawn, regal and magnificent, sharing a kill with a robust male leopard. Months later, she spotted the telltale sign of tiny, accompanying shadows. Cubs. Dawn was not just surviving, she was thriving, continuing the lineage, a testament to nature's resilience and Sarah's unwavering dedication. A profound sense of peace settled over Sarah, a deep fulfillment knowing she had given Dawn a second chance at life, not just for herself, but for generations to come. Sarah eventually reduced her direct monitoring, allowing Dawn to truly be wild, a ghost in the vast African landscape. Yet, the memory of Dawn, the tiny cub who scratched at her door, remained a cornerstone of her life, a powerful reminder of the profound connections possible between species. That unique bond had reshaped her, healing her own wounds and igniting a fierce new purpose. She found herself dedicating more of her time not just to photography, but to active wildlife conservation, advocating for protected lands, and sharing Dawn's story to inspire others. She still visited the wilder corners of the reserve occasionally, a silent pilgrimage, hoping for a fleeting glimpse of her beloved leopard. Sometimes, through the dense foliage, she would catch the glint of golden eyes, a fleeting shadow, and in those moments, her heart soared, knowing Dawn was out there, wild and free, a living monument to their extraordinary, unforgettable journey. If you were touched by Sarah and Dawn's story, please like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below. What animal story has moved you the most? And don't forget to check out our next video for another incredible tale of survival and connection in the wild.